Kendall, and I'm a hook stockkeeper here, so I'm part of the team that takes care of our tapirs every day. And we are here to talk about tapirs because today is actually World Tapir Day. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about tapirs while we wait for people to hop on. Currently behind me we have Molly, our adult female tapir. She's about 7 years old, and then her daughter is eating out of the barrel currently. That's Frida. Frida's 1 year old. She was actually born here. Molly is paired up with our male Noah, who lives next door at the moment, so that they can have more offspring like Frida. Barred tapirs are an endangered species, so we are part of a breeding program to try and help boost those population numbers. Right now, Molly is eating some alfalfa hay. It's part of their regular diet. They get it every single day. It provides a lot of green roughage for them. And Frida's currently playing with a puzzle feeder that's part of their enrichment program. So these guys kind of spend their days eating and sleeping, so we want to make sure that they get a lot of time to do all of those things. So we will put their food into things like puzzle feeders where they have to work at kind of getting it out bit by bit, just to make their day a little bit more interesting. So Molly is eating alfalfa, and Frida is eating a little bit of a pelleted grain diet that's got a lot of minerals and nutrients in it. That barrel has lots of holes in it, so as they roll that barrel, it's going to fall out. Erica just asked, what do they eat? They eat lots of plants. These guys are herbivores in the wild. So they eat lots of grasses and leaves right off of the branches, and they really like fruits. Things like bananas or oranges or apples are special treats for these guys. They really like anything that's fruit. Levi asks, what are their predators? In the wild, these guys are really only preyed on by jaguars. They live in the same part of the world that jaguars are found naturally, and when they are younger they can get preyed on by jaguars. But once they become old and adult, like Molly here is about 500 pounds. She can get up to 600 pounds at her heaviest. Jaguars aren't going to do a whole lot with an adult tapir, so it's really just while they're young. Tiffany's asking, where do they live in the wild? These guys are found in Central and South America. There are actually 3 different species of tapir that live throughout South America. These guys are found kind of furthest north, mostly in Mexico and Central America. They live in a lot of like the swampy areas in the rainforests. These guys are really good at holding their breath for long periods of time underwater. They're pretty good at moving through water quickly. They're not great swimmers, but they will kind of sink to the bottom and walk along through the water. So they're really good at really semi-aquatic places. Renee is asking, what is their lifespan? So in zoos, they can actually live into their early 20s. Both of these guys are actually pretty young because of that. In the wild, their lifespan isn't known super well, but we're guessing it's probably somewhere between 15 and 20. They do end up living longer in human care than they do in the wild. Ava asks, do they get along with capybara? They do. We do have a capybara out here currently with them. Usually our capybara, our Baird's tapirs, and our anteaters all live together. So Pop is over there sleeping in the shade right now. He has the option to come over and eat some of this food if he wants, but right now he's decided to take a nap. Drew asks, what are they related to? That's a good question. These guys are most closely related to rhinoceros and horses. So you wouldn't necessarily guess that by looking at them, but they actually have 3 toes on each foot. So they are considered odd-toed ungulates. So because of that, those are their closest relatives. They've got long noses, as you can see as they eat. Their noses are semi-prehensile, and so they can actually use those long noses to scoop the food into their mouth as they eat and as they find things, and to pull it down branches. Amanda asks, do they mate for life? No, they do not. Very, very few animals actually mate for life. Tapirs are no exception. So females will have their own territory, and males will have their own territory, and several males' territories will overlap with the females. So they will breed likely with multiple males throughout their life. And same with males and females. Gabriel asks, are they smart? They can be. They definitely learn lots of behaviors, and they know how to survive in the wild. That takes a lot of brains. And so these guys can learn all kinds of behaviors and training-wise, and also just for survival. Joseph asks, will they move to the new Pantanal habitat? Yes, these guys are one of the keystone species for our new Pantanal area that's going to be opening soon this year. So they will be making that move probably in the next few months. We're going to get them used to their new home in the Pantanal area, and then they'll be able to be ready for when you guys are able to come back and see the Pantanal as well. Tiffany asks, how many species of tapirs are there? Right now, there's believed to be 4 species of tapir. There are 3 found throughout Central and South America, and then 1 very large species called Malayan tapirs that are found in Southeast Asia. Baird's tapirs, which is what we're looking at here, it's what we have at the Houston Zoo. They are actually the largest of all the species in South America, in the Americas. Malayan tapirs are a little bit heavier, but Baird's tapirs are the biggest of all the ones on this continent. We want to say hello to the residents of the Elmcroft Senior Living in Lake Jackson. We're happy for you guys to be joining us. Hope you're learning a lot about tapirs. Katie asks, how did they get their names? So I'm not actually sure what the name tapir really means. It's probably named after something in a native language from where they're from. But if you're asking about these individual animals, Molly came to us with her name. She was born at a zoo up north, and she came to us. Frida we named her after Frida Kahlo. She was born here. They do know their names. They will respond to their names when keepers call them. We can use it in training sessions. Sometimes they choose to ignore us, but that's their prerogative. Amanda asks, how long are they pregnant? A tapir's gestation period is extremely long. They're pregnant for about 14 months at a time. Once they give birth, they will only give birth to one baby at a time, and then that baby usually weighs about 20 pounds, and it will quickly grow. Damaris asks, how big can they get? So with tapirs, females are actually larger than males. So Molly is fully grown on the left. She weighs anywhere from 500 to 600 pounds, depending on whether or not she's pregnant. It goes up and down. And that is pretty standard. Males usually weigh about 500 pounds. So they are only a few feet tall at the shoulder, but they are very, very long. They're about 6 feet long from nose to tail. Gabriel asks, what senses do they rely on? They have a pretty good sense of hearing. You can watch their ears kind of flicker back and forth as they're eating. They're just listening to everything that's going on around them. If they hear anything that they get startled by, they'll run from it. They also have a very good sense of smell. That big old long nose is good for something. Shelly asks, what is their favorite food? So it can vary individual to individual, but these guys really seem to like bananas. Lots of fruits, things like apples and pears. They really, really like those. But one of their favorite foods is actually the leaves right off the branches that you see them kind of eating over by the base of the tree. Alyssa asks, do they have a tail? They do. It's just very, very small. It's not long. They don't do much with it. But if they turn around, you might be able to get a chance to see. It's only a couple inches long. Frida's playing with a toy that's got a little bit of food in it right now. It is part of our enrichment program here, so we want to make sure that every day is a little bit different than the day before. So they have lots of different objects and toys that they can play with. That currently has a little bit of food in it, and it's got holes in it. So as she pushes it around, little treats fall out. So it encourages her to forage throughout the day instead of just eating all her food and then going to sleep. Jaden asks, how do they defend themselves? That's a good question, Jaden. So they actually have very, very strong teeth and neck muscles. These guys can bite, and they have a very, very, very strong bite force. So if they ever feel threatened by something, they will defend themselves by biting. Christina asks, do they play with each other? They do. When these guys play with each other, it looks a little bit like fighting. They'll kind of body bump each other and headbutt each other and chase each other around in circles while making really high-pitched, squeaky vocalizations. And that is kind of how they play with each other. Frida and Molly are mother and daughter, and so they are pretty friendly with each other. They will share food. They will play with each other regularly. They also like to play in the pool. They'll take turns kind of pushing each other around once they're swimming in the pool. Tapirs can hold their breath for a really long time, somewhere up to 15 to 20 minutes, so they can actually take naps underwater occasionally when they feel like it. Usually we'll find them in the pool in the summer afternoons when it's hot. It's where they go to cool off. Ashley asks, do they build their own shelter in the wild? No, they actually don't. These guys live in pretty dense rainforests or very near floodplains. So they end up just finding shelter amongst the trees that are already there. Or like I was just saying, they sometimes will even go to sleep underwater. That's the shelter that they need. I'm going to talk a little bit about browse and enrichment because I've been throwing those terms out a little bit so far. Browse is what we call the freshly cut branches from the trees. So these guys would naturally be eating leaves off of trees in the wild. And so our horticulture department here at the Houston Zoo takes care of all of the plants that you see throughout the zoo. And they actually will cut down branches if they ever have to do tree trimming, and they'll drop those leaves and those branches for us to feed out to our animals so that they get to eat the fresh leaves right off the branch, and our animals really like that. We also use it for enrichment. We like to say here at the zoo that enrichment stands for encouraging natural reactions in creative habitats, because if you look at that, kind of spells enrich, it's an acronym. And so that way we can encourage them to do natural behaviors. These are the things that they would be doing in the wild. They'd be foraging, they'd be looking for food, they'd be exploring their space. And we want to encourage that. So sometimes we'll use objects like barrels and puzzle feeders to get them to be doing those natural behaviors. Gentry is asking, do they like water? Yes, they love it. They get in that pool almost every single day in the summer, and sometimes even in the winter. So these guys always have some big pool of water that they can get to. They like to sleep in it, they'll play in it, they'll even poop in it sometimes. Jessica's asking, do they roll in mud? That's a good question. Sometimes they do. I think that they seem to spend more time actually just in solid water than in mud. But the capybara actually really like to roll in mud. So as you guys can see right now, Baird's tapirs, when they're adults, are fairly uniform in color. They're mostly black. They've got a little bit of white around their ears and around their faces. But when tapirs are born, they're actually very cute. They look like little watermelons. They have stripes and spots. They're usually more of a brown color with white stripes and spots. And they'll stay that coloration until they're about 6 months old, and then they'll start to develop their adult coloration. By the time they're maybe 8 to 10 months old, they are their adult color. So Frida is the one that's closest to you. She has a much whiter neck and face than Molly does. That's one of the ways we can tell them apart. But other than that, they can be a little bit difficult to tell apart. They don't have a whole lot of identifying features. Helen asks, how would they escape predators? These guys are actually pretty fast. They will run if they feel threatened, and they will run into the water. So we were talking about predators earlier. Most of the predators that they have are jaguars. Jaguars can swim, but maybe not quite as well as a tapir. So tapirs, if they do get startled by something, will run away, run into water, and try and shelter there until the danger passes. So we're going to introduce these guys again in case anybody's just joining us. Frida is the Baird's tapir that's closest to you guys, and then Molly, her mom, is kind of walking around in the back. Molly is 7 years old. She's the adult, and then Frida is her latest calf. Frida is about 1 year old right now, so she is not fully independent from mom, but is quickly getting there. They'll usually stay with mom until they're somewhere between 8 to 16 months old. So Frida's right in the middle there. Indira asks, do you interact with them one-on-one? We definitely can. We do not actually go in with the tapirs and share the same space as them. They are so large and can bite very strongly, and we don't want to necessarily risk our safety just to go in with them. Instead, we have special fences in the back where we can train with them through the fence, kind of a large mesh that we can reach our hands through and work with them so that we can train them. They do like scratches around their chin and around their face, and Molly is actually ultrasound trained. So she's trained to stand still and let us use an ultrasound wand on her babies, on her belly, so that we can monitor her pregnancies as they go forward. So we do get at training sessions, interactions with them, but for the most part, there's always a fence between us and them somehow. Jennifer asks, how fast could they run? These guys can reach, I want to say 15 to 20 miles an hour. Faster than a human. Definitely faster than a human.
Kendall, are they endangered in the wild?
Are they endangered in the wild? Yes, they are. So these guys, unfortunately, are facing habitat loss in the wild. And so because of that, the wild spaces of the world are shrinking. These guys are facing less and less room to grow. So they are an endangered species, which is why we're super happy to have them here, part of a breeding program. Heather's asking, how do they clean themselves? So if they feel like they need to clean themselves, they will just go into that water. Water is the answer to a lot of tapirs problems. They'll go into water, they'll rest in there, they'll clean themselves up a little bit, and then they'll come back out. Emma says, what do they sound like? That's actually a really good question. I wish I could imitate it well, but I can't quite. So they will make long, high-pitched whistles, and then they also make a little bit of a chirping noise. And so mothers and babies do it back and forth frequently. Males will also vocalize to females and vice versa when they're ready to breed. But they usually are fairly quiet animals in other instances. Right now they're kind of walking around, they're munching on some treats that we're throwing out. We've got some leaves and some branches for them to chew on. We've got a little bit of alfalfa hay. we're tossing out things like lettuce and sweet potato and apple and some just extra treats for them to be wandering around and find. Liam is asking, why are they black? That's a good question. These guys are actually pretty nocturnal in the wild. They're active mostly at night, and so being dark colored kind of helps them camouflage really well as they move around in the night. Jackie asks, who is Frida's dad and where is he? Frida's dad is named Noah. He's living right next door. We actually have just behind that fence you see in the background. Tapirs are solitary. They are not social animals. The males do not help raise offspring. That is the mom's job. So after breeding, they tend to go their own separate ways. So Noah lives alone currently. He will be put back with Molly when it's time for Molly to breed again. But for now, Molly and Frida live together and Noah lives next door. Kara, what are their personalities like? That's a good question. So Frida's still a little bit of a baby. I think her personality is still developing a little bit. She's a bit of a scaredy cat, but she's kind of starting to gain independence. She's still a little silly. She likes to play. She gets what we call the zoomies every now and then, where she will literally just start to run in circles in the exhibit and like kick her heels up and just goof off and run in and out of the water and roll around, and she just likes to act a little silly. Molly is a little bit more calm. She's very focused. When you give her a task to do, when you ask her in a training session to do something, if you give her a puzzle feeder, she becomes very focused on that task and she wants to figure it out and figure out how to get what she wants out of it. She's a little bit less playful. Emma says, how can we save them in the wild? That's a great question, Emma. So saving these guys in the wild, one of your best bets is by recycling paper. These guys are definitely threatened by habitat loss. They live in the forests. If we can recycle paper and not waste it, then trees don't have to be cut down as much. You can also help support the Houston Zoo. We have plenty of conservation partners throughout South America that are helping protect the habitat that these guys are found in the wild. Stephen asks, how long can they stretch their nose? That nose can be a good 6 to 8 inches long when they fully extend it. It is semi-prehensile, so they can sort of grasp at things with it and use it to scoop food into their mouth. You can see Frida doing it right now as she finds little bits and pieces of stuff on the ground. She uses that nose to scoop it into her mouth. Turkessa asks, how fast do they grow? And that's a good question. So when they're born, they're usually about, I want to say 20 to 30 pounds. And then they will be well over 100 pounds by the time they're maybe 6 months old. By the time they're 2 years old, they're very close to fully grown, which is closer to like 400 to 500 pounds. So they grow very, very fast when they're babies. Margot asks, can they scratch themselves? They tend to scratch themselves on other things. So they have hooves, not claws. So instead of using their feet or their toes to scratch themselves, they usually will walk up to something that's textured, like a log or a branch, and they'll rub themselves, whatever part is itchy, they'll rub on that as a way to scratch any itches that they might have. Paige asks, what do they feel like? They feel interesting. So their fur is actually not very dense, and it is very, very short, and it's not soft. So they feel a little bit rough when you touch them, sort of like a wire hair terrier. All right, guys. Thanks for joining us here today to talk about tapirs. We want to suggest you definitely join us tomorrow. We're going to be Facebook Live again at 11. Thank you again for helping us celebrate World Tapir Day. If you want to continue to support us, please go ahead and go to the website, houstonzoo.org, and help donate to our zoo emergency fund. And tomorrow at 11, we will be live again.